Welcome to the Crime Redefined podcast, produced by Zero Cliff Media. Coming to you from the US Bank Tower, high above downtown Los Angeles. In our podcast, we drill deep into forensics and criminal investigation from the viewpoint of the defense, as well as explore the intersection of the media and the justice system.
I'm Dion Mitchell here with Mehul and Anjaria. In today's episode, we will be discussing the crazy and disturbing cases from Mehul's career. We're also going to be covering the latest crime shows and a little bit about where we hope to go in the future with this podcast.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of ground to cover today. But, you know, Dion, I think you and I are getting kind of warmed up at this and hopefully getting pretty good at it. So let's get started.
Let's kick it off with your most favorite question, and I mean that with sarcastic humor. Tell me about your most disturbing case or most interesting case.
Okay, so let me just hit you with all the caveats that I tell anybody else. How do you pick one, right? They're all good. Also, you know, maybe some of the juiciest ones are unfortunately confidential. You know, if there's a famous person involved or maybe there's an international.
But that's the stuff that we want.
It is, but, you know, hey, listen, I'm a professional, so.
Plus, I don't want to lose my business partner and having him
right.
show up on our door arresting you.
Okay, having said that, though, there are plenty of cases that have been adjudicated already, so we can talk about some of those.
Good.
So, well, everybody loves a serial killer case, right?
I know I do.
Well, not everybody, but... So there was a case, I testified in the trial, it would have been 2006. This was a well-known case, Wayne Adam Ford. He was a serial killer. He was a trucker, and his route was up and down the California coast. And his gig was basically he was picking up women, killing them, and then just dumping their bodies in various places. Of course, in California, we have a lot of great terrain to dump bodies. And so this was obviously in multiple counties where this took place, but I believe that a majority of them were in San Bernardino County, which is where I was working at the time. And I recall that one of the bodies was found in a neighboring county, but I actually ended up working that case because they wanted to consolidate it in San Bernardino. I guess the headline of this is how this guy was caught. So he marches into a police station in 1998, I think, pulls something out of his pocket. He's got a Ziploc bag. You want to guess what's in there?
Oh, man, do I want to know?
A severed woman's breast.
Oh, my God.
So I think this guy got an attack of conscience. He plops it down in the police department and says, I've killed 4 people.
Oh, man.
So, and I'll just give you an idea of how hideous this was. The particular case I worked, a torso was found floating in an aqueduct.
Okay, so let me stop you there. When you say work, what was your role on that case?
Sorry, at the time, I was working with the Sheriff's Crime Laboratory. So I performed the actual DNA analysis and testified about that in court, which is not what I do now, as we know. But in this case that I worked, there was a floating torso in an aqueduct in, I think, a county neighboring San Bernardino.
This has a Green River. Is it Green River?
Not Green River.
No, but it has a Green River feel to it.
Oh, right, absolutely. Yes.
Copycat? Could this guy be a little bit of a copycat serial killer?
Could be, because it seems like there's hardly a variation on a theme on a lot of these. There's some creativity, but there's always some kind of pattern. I actually don't know how he was inspired originally or what his mental pathology was. But anyway, you know, even though there was only a torso left that had been submerged, there was still sexual assault evidence that tied him to the case.
Wow.
So obviously he was convicted, not pretty easy one there with all the confessions. In fact, he confessed to 4, but I think there may have been 3 more.
That they never linked him to?
Yeah, and then who knows what the real total is, right?
What's his status now?
He was convicted, I think, back in 2006, so he's on death row.
Wow. So what else you got in your vault?
Well, let's stick with the theme of serial killers and a more current one. Last year in Orange County, there was a big trial for 2 guys, Stephen Gordon and Frank Cano. And for Stephen Gordon, he was actually pro per. So he was serving as his own attorney. Now, what was at stake here? 4 bodies.
Wow.
Now, what's really interesting about these 2 guys is they were actually on probation at the time, and they were wearing ankle monitors when they were committing these crimes.
kidding me. So they were
Yes.
GPS locked in.
They were GPS locked in. So obviously this became great evidence during the trial. And in fact, they looked at the GPS records of these two guys, cell phone records of the victim, and that brought them together.
Right to the X marks the spot.
So this was particularly disturbing. The way they found one of the bodies is they were, at least this one, they dumped her in a recycling bin. And so the trash comes and they bring it to the recycling facility. The guys are at the facility working the conveyor belt, and all of a sudden they see a body part. They say, whoa, hold on, stop the press. And there's a body there. So obviously one of the things you're going to do is, what garbage can did that come from, right? That's going to be one of the first things you can do. So that, the GPS records, the cell phone records, that was key. But there was a DNA component as well because there was sexual assault. So I was actually Mr. Gordon's DNA expert, and I met with him several times pre-trial. And in Orange County, the jail's a little bit different. They put me in a room with him with no divider between us.
What was that like?
I was okay with it, because I'm used to it. But I'm just thinking, I don't know, from a liability standpoint, is this the best way to do this?
Just for people listening, what is that like? Just for you as a private but state-appointed DNA expert working for a pro per, what goes through your mind? Just how is that? How do you manage that? How do you manage your emotions? How do you manage your relationship with the pro per, with essentially your client, right?
Client. And that's exactly it. You really have to treat it like any other case, and you have to get used to the circumstances. And I think when I first got the call on this, it was actually a deputy from the jail called me and said, would you accept a call from this person? So even they know that, like, well, is anyone even going to answer this call?
Right.
So, in this case, and I've said this before, I think on some of the other episodes, to meet Mr. Gordon doesn't seem like a serial killer.
Everyday guy.
You can see him on Dateline or something like that. And, he's very actually somewhat apologetic. He's in court. He dressed nice. I'm like, did this guy do that? It's hard to see it.
I think about sometimes when you tell me these stories, and let's say you're out and about, you're in public and maybe out with, friends or family, and, everybody's talking about their clients, and you say, yeah, mine's a serial killer.
Yeah, like it's no big deal, right?
Yeah. Now, you told me about a case a while back that there was a murder in Men's Central Jail. Is that right?
Yes. This gentleman, okay, so basically they were at the mess hall. There's a big line. And the victim in this case, he has some sort of mental issue. I don't know if he was mentally challenged or what it was, but he maybe shouldn't have been in with the general population. That was a whole other issue, I think, in the trial. But for whatever reason, these two guys pretty much stomped him to death. And this is in the presence of a lot of people. So you can imagine what that crime scene looked like. Blood, jail clothes all over the place, very messy. And so the question is, what do you do with the DNA evidence? Because there's blood and jail clothes all over. Now, people in jail, they might share their clothes. Clothing was found in a pile. It could have intermixed. So really the question was, who wore what items of clothing that had blood on it, and who had the most culpability?
And what was your relationship to one of the people accused of doing the stomping? Was one of your clients?
Originally, he was pro per. Now, by the time we went to trial, he actually had a very prominent attorney.
But that was the relationship. You had someone who was your client was previously accused of the crime of he was one of the stompers.
He was one of the stompers, exactly.
Okay.
And I think he was actually one of my early pro pers. He's one who I had for a number of years. Obviously, a death penalty case takes forever to go through the system.
And what's his status today?
He was convicted but did not get the death penalty.
So he's just at San Quentin? Or
I'm not sure where he is, but, life in prison.
Oh. And now talk to me about the Boris Graham case.
Yeah, okay. This was actually featured on America's Most Wanted. And so two people actually, it was a home invasion. And apparently the victim was wealthy. He had a Bentley, all kinds of jewelry. And they took the victim and they threw him in the trunk of the Bentley. And then the perpetrators drove away in the car. Can't remember the details, but anyway, the cops are chasing them. The Bentley crashes into a wall and the poor victim is flown out of the trunk and is killed. And the one guy at least somehow got away, and he was in a different state, I think Florida, and he was on the run for a while. Well, there was a ski mask found in the Bentley with DNA matching these guys. But yeah, he was on the lam for a while, and he was on America's Most Wanted.
And was he a client of yours?
He was never pro per. There was an attorney, I think, the whole way on that one.
Did the attorney retain you? Or did you review the DNA?
Yeah, I did both, actually. I reviewed the work, and then I did some additional testing, which, as I recall, wasn't particularly helpful for him. But, you know, you got to do it anyway.
Right,
you get what you get.
Yeah,
and at least you can say that box was checked.
Right. And that, DNA evidence is what it is. It's not like you can make it into something that it's not.
Absolutely.
Mehul, I remember a while back of you telling me about a Halloween murder case. I think it was in Georgia.
Yes, it was. And it actually was Halloween night. This was a elderly woman was found in a burning house. She had a gag around her mouth. It was an ace bandage that was wrapped several times. And ultimately, she died of the smoke inhalation. Now, where the DNA was here was very interesting. As that ace bandage was unwrapped, the fingertip of a latex glove was found in the wrapping there. And on that fingertip, there was a clear DNA profile that matched a gentleman who I believe was a handyman who had worked in that house before. And on top of that, out in the front yard, there was some kind of mask, some kind of Halloween mask, where there was some, I'm going to call it like weak or inconclusive DNA evidence that also aligned with him. Wow.
So what was the inroad for him? Was he her personal handyman and had been to the house before as a handyman?
Exactly. He had done some work on the house in some capacity. So look at how incriminating that looks on one hand, right? You can imagine if I'll use you as an example. If I'm wearing latex gloves and I want to wrap your mouth up, you know how that goes? Maybe you get the fingertip of the glove stuck in there, you pull it, and oh man, it rips. So that could explain how it's there. But then let's look at it from the defense point of view. If the guy was a handyman, maybe he left some gloves there.
Right.
Somebody else used them. So that would be the angle of the defense. So it sounds bad, but that's how you might work with that. If I remember, there was some issue about some possible contamination in the lab as well. So there were some things to work with. And in the first trial, there was actually a hung jury.
Were you involved?
I did. I went out to Georgia and testified, actually. Now, in the second trial, I think they lit him up for everything.
And so he's obviously locked up somewhere.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, when he was in jail, I think before the second trial, he pushed or fell off like a tier, and he's actually in a wheelchair.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of karma there.
I can't imagine being in a wheelchair in jail. It's bad enough, being able-bodied, but oh my God.
That's right. Who reached out to you, by that way? Was it the state of Georgia?
The attorney himself. It was, I don't think it was like a public defender type case or anything. He was a private attorney that found me one way or the other.
Okay, and then you flew out to Georgia to work.
Exactly. So I reviewed the work that they did, and then we must have decided that my testimony would be worthwhile. So I flew out there for the trial.
So all in all, how much DNA evidence was there?
Just the glove and the Halloween mask.
And that was enough, obviously, for the jury?
That was enough.
Now, take a more wild turn. Now, I remember you telling me about a case where there was a body in a barrel.
Yeah, so, this was a pro per in Men's Central Jail. And basically, he was accused of shooting two people, stuffing their body in a barrel, and then he transported the barrel. I think he put it in a storage facility, like rented a storage facility, and it started smelling. So then he moved it, I believe, back to a house. And
little Breaking Bad in there.
Exactly. I mean, he didn't melt him down. That's sort of
where it went wrong.
That's the next level of crazy, right? Yeah. So they were there. But, he, and I think one of his relatives was actually worked in the sheriff's department. And so for a while, I know he was on the run. And ultimately, as I recall, he was on some sort of rooftop and the LAPD was chasing him and they ended up shooting him like maybe a month after this. So it was quite a caper. But in talking to him at the jail, this will always stick out. He was very, very frank about putting those bodies in the barrel and talking about, well, geez, it's kind of, when bodies are stiff, they're a little bit hard to put in there, and very matter of fact about it. The reason he was matter of fact about it is that he thought he killed them in self-defense.
Where did that angle come from?
Yeah, so he had a story that, he was feared for his life. He had to shoot them. So he was concerned about reporting the crime because he was on probation. So in his mind, he thought the only thing he did wrong is not report the bodies.
So he wasn't running away from this at all?
He wasn't. No, he said, I killed him. I put him in there, but it was self-defense. And the reason I didn't report it is because I was on probation, so I just made a really bad, error in judgment.
And so since he was a pro per, obviously he hired you, through the state. And what was your task on that case?
I don't think that there was a ton of DNA evidence, actually. But no matter what, you want to have an expert because you don't know what the other side's going to do with the DNA.
Right.
First of all, you have to understand it and then know, could you use it? And then also you want to make sure if the other side goes a little bit too far with it. But it wasn't a DNA case per se. It was an element of the case.
So he's just basically getting his, the tools of the trade that are available to him, bringing in his team just for whatever might come up.
Absolutely. And in a capital case like that, that needs to be done.
Were you around when the verdict came down?
No, I actually never testified in that case.
I'm just curious, since he was playing the self-defense card, when it came down and he was convicted, if he was shocked, how can they not see this as self-defense?
That's a good question. You're not really sure what they're thinking. If this is what they truly believe, or if this is just something that they're spinning a tale or what. I mean, hard to say. And I wasn't there in court to see kind of how jurors were reacting or how he was presenting or what.
Speaking of in court, what is it like when you're on the stand and he's a pro per? So I would imagine he's doing his cross-examination of you, right?
Or the direct testimony. And I'll tell you exactly how it goes because I write them a script.
So why don't you tell us about that?
Sure. So let's say that I'm going to testify on behalf of the defendant, on a pro per defendant, meaning that whatever I found is good for him or at least neutral, and he wants to use me as a witness. So I am going to write a script of the exact questions to ask me. Now, some of them are technical. I have to be qualified as an expert. We have to lay foundation of what I did, and then others are opinion. So I know that testimony is going to fly in court. The other parts of the case where I'm not involved and he's on his own, I don't know how the courthouse is going to go. I don't know how he's going to question witnesses. Usually that's a huge problem and a big disaster. But the few times I've sat in the witness chair with a pro per, it's almost as good as an attorney, honestly.
Really?
Because, you think about it, if they put on a suit and they're well-spoken and they just stick to my script, that part's going to come off well.
I always thought sometimes it would just go off the rails, like the guy's just looking for his 15 minutes of fame in court and is going to use it as an opportunity just to, create havoc in the courtroom. Well,
I think that havoc usually occurs during jury selection with other witnesses. But with a professional witness such as myself, they listen to me and they stick to the script.
Oh, that's good. So obviously you, over time, as crazy as all this sounds, you develop a working relationship with them.
Sure, absolutely.
Wow. So let's take a little bit of a turn here and discuss some of the new crime shows that are out. Now, there was one that we both recently covered, which was the new A&E Marcia Clark show. And we got into a little bit of a discussion about the dog scent expert. And you actually have some background on this as well. So why don't we maybe first cover the actual show and how it was displayed on the Marcia Clark show, and then also tell me about your personal experience with it.
Right. So, this show, I think, followed the formula of a lot of them, which is let's look at a famous case that's already been adjudicated. And let's go back.
And this one was Casey Anthony.
Sorry. Let's go back and reinvestigate it. And the typical formula is let's get an SUV and let's put, 2 or 3 investigators in there and let's go back to the scene, even if there's nothing there and whatever. Let's do that. In this particular show, first of all, Marcia Clark has credibility. I want to see what her take is on this. She's got the know-how. There are other shows, we won't mention them, but you and I have talked about some of the people do the investigating. What are they there for? What are they really adding?
What are they bringing to the table?
Yeah, and even in this Casey Anthony episode, they had one of the investigators who actually worked the case. So I'm like, oh, okay, I'll watch this. So I always have to look at this through the lens of the defense. So there was one scene where Marcia Clark sits down with one of the attorneys, Cheney Mason, and in my opinion, he's sort of made to look like a buffoon. He's supposed to be like the eye roll moment. We're like, oh, look at the crazy defense attorney. What's he talking about? And one of the topics was about this smell of death in the trunk, So could you smell a decomposing body in there? And what if he brought a dog in, a cadaver dog? And obviously the fact that the cadaver dog hit was important in the trial. So the attorney, Cheney Mason, was saying, hey, look, yeah, they had that evidence, but I don't know if I necessarily believe that. And so he was just chastised like crazy, like, well, what do you mean? It was admitted. And either it was the editing or how he explained it, but it just didn't play well. Again, he looked like, oh, the crazy defense attorney. But I think what he was saying is like, yeah, there was some kind of scientific evidence, but it wasn't DNA. So there's levels of forensic science. Some of them are consistent with, in my opinion, and then there's DNA, 1 in 39 quadrillion, that's absolute.
Okay, so for the layman, so help me understand. So he's saying that the actual scent was not scientific. There's not a quantifiable...
Using a dog to, identify a cadaver dog.
And it was admitted.
Yeah, it was in the trial. So that's what Marcia Clark is saying. Well, what do you mean you don't believe in it? The jury heard the testimony, and so, again, maybe that was theater, maybe that was TV.
Right. So
it wasn't so ridiculous. In other words, his criticism of the evidence wasn't so ridiculous.
And then you actually had a case a while back where there was dog scent expert. Is that correct?
Yeah. So in this case, you could have even done some DNA, or you could have used a dog. And this was some years ago, but I was actually hired to exactly explain how DNA is strong, the scientific background, and how dog scent evidence is not exactly the same. So I sat in and listened to the dog scent expert and, helped the attorney with cross-exam, like, hey, can you proficiency test the dog? Can you calibrate the dog? Do you have an accreditation? All the things that DNA has, pointing out what dog scent evidence doesn't have.
And what was the result of the case that you were involved with?
I think that there was a conviction in that one, as I recall. I honestly don't remember.
Because I'm just always wondering when, whether it's your case or the Casey Anthony, where something like this comes up, it always sets that bar, and there's going to be another defense down the road that's going to use that. And so I'm trying to, figure out, okay, is there a track record with this? Or is there success? Or are we going to see this in future cases?
There's a trend in forensics, and we alluded to that in a past episode. So again, not all forensic science is 100% got you. There's levels. In DNA, we have statistics, 1 in 38 quadrillion. Other forms of forensic science, like based on my training and experience, it is this. And so nowadays we're finding out that that's not good enough.
Right. Wow, it's kind of interesting stuff, and how it lays the groundwork, if I can say it, going forward. So right now we got a few episodes under our belt. We're getting kind of warmed up. What are you thinking about, topics for future episodes?
Well, I am looking forward to bringing in some interview guests and getting some different takes on some of these issues. So, for example, in LA County, I work with a lot of esteemed investigators and other experts.
Give me a couple of the experts. Like what kind of experts we're talking about?
Gang expertise, computer forensics, ballistics, some of the other forensic sciences, some of the other specialized investigations.
Now, obviously, those are all independent and they have their own private practice, but a lot of them fill the same role that you do, working with pro pers as state-appointed experts. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. So we, this particular team I'm talking about, we bump into each other in a lot of these cases, and we all work the pro pers. So we might have a case and say, well, hey, we need a DNA expert, or, oh, I know a guy who specializes.
Is that a small world? Like you say, you bump into them, but is that a small, group of people that take on this line of work?
Yes and no. I mean, there's a little sort of club of us, but I mean, in LA County, the justice system is so huge and there's so many cases, but I guess I do bump into the same people quite a bit.
Yeah, because I'm always wondering if some people just aren't interested in doing this kind of work, working with pro pers.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, in fact, for an investigator, you have to designate whether or not you're willing to take pro pers in LA County, and some of them just aren't willing to do that.
And then you also mentioned about bringing in some high-profile cases where you've had experience, working with, discussing their actual personal case.
Right. So, we've got a few people that, you and I have talked to about developing different ideas. And so some high profile cases, people who are personally involved, people who are maybe victims' rights advocates, and maybe kind of get the other side of the coin a little bit. There's some attorneys, I think, who've worked some high profile cases and specialize in some of the issues we've talked about. So I think we should have some really good, colorful discussions and kind of expand our scope.
Yeah, that's kind of, we should probably go into that a little bit. That's a little bit of our day job. We do work in TV development, and it's, Zero Cliff Media, and it's centered around development of crime shows.
Right, absolutely. So, we'll continue to educate and entertain with this podcast, but I think we'll just kind of take it to the next level.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Crime Redefined podcast. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Crime Redefined. Please send us your comments and questions and join us for the next episode.